So I think without further ado, which one of you guys has prepared anything for Gorillas in the Mist?
Me.
Yay! Scott it is. He's won the lottery of life. Scott, what's that Gorillas in the Mist all about?
Well, this is the tale of occupational therapist turned naturalist Diane Fossey, played by Sigourney Weaver, who moved from Kentucky to the Congo to survey and study endangered mountain gorillas, a 6-month sojourn that extended to her life's work. Arriving in the Congo, she enlists a local tracker. A local tracker, not a local tractor. That made for a more interesting film. John O'Maria Milu's Sambargi, to set up a camp and track down the few remaining guerrilla families, eventually meeting with success, only for the civil war to catch up with her and see them booted out of the Congo. Ultimately, she's undeterred and starts again in Rwanda, where she's able not only to catalogue the guerrillas, but to study and document their behaviour more closely than anyone had previously dared to, including very up-close and personal interactions. It's not without difficulty, particularly when her efforts to conserve the gorillas and their habitations clash with local poachers, but the profile of her work is raised when National Geographic send photographer Bob Campbell, played by Brian Brown, to document her work. The two become lovers, although we're left with the impression that Diane is married mainly to her work. It does rather skip quickly through the 20 years of dedicated work, during which, if the film is to believe, she became rather possessive of the guerrillas and the territory, although through to her untimely murder in 1985, an ultimately unsolved crime, although one with some fairly obvious suspects. We're left in no doubt about the remarkable nature of Fossey's work and character, and Anna Hamilton Phelan's script and Michael Apted's direction back up a highly commendable turn from Weaver. The production design is also pretty accomplished. On a first viewing, I certainly couldn't really tell where the real gorillas end and the prosthetics begin, at least without going on to consider the insurance implications of what's happening on the screen. It is, I suppose, a question raised by every biopic. Is the subject's work or the subject more important, or perhaps just more interesting? And I'm not 100% sure the creators hit quite the right balance here. Certainly, it seems to be more focused on the work for the middle hour and change, and doesn't quite give as much of an insight into Fossey's character as I'd prefer. It's not really all that noticeable until the backstretch, but as she starts throwing around possessives, my gorillas, my mountain, to, the people actually native to that country, there's certainly room for a bit more probing than the film seemed to want to get into, just settling back into the earlier established she's strong-willed explanation, and then showing us some more gorillas. Which, to be fair, works well enough to make this a worthwhile and worthy watch, and a fitting tribute to a remarkable character. I don't know if this had quite the cultural impact it deserves outside of Ice Cube's Now I Gotta Wetcha, but if, like me, you've passed on this until now, it's well worth tracking down.
Gorillas report to the mist.
To the mist. It's the why in Fossey that makes all the difference, isn't it? Pause for laughter. Poacher, 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 gorilla hands. Who's stubbing cigars out in a gorilla's hand anyway? Is that not going to stink of burning flesh every time you do it?
I did wonder about that. Brian Brown's character is the only person given any sort of actual insight into the economy of the region in the film, which that needed to be massively expanded. But he's suggesting that these people are very poor and that they're making a living this way and selling his hypothetical doctor in Miami who has a gorilla hand ashtray. But I did wonder, who has one of those? I can maybe see the actual gorilla head as a trophy, sort of, but the other thing seems certainly like Harry Potter.
Certainly a rad Halloween costume. Sorry, I make light of it, but no, you're right. There's so Scott, you've pretty much covered my main problem with this film, which is there is never any understanding of what's driving Diane Fossey. What's informing her passion? What is my motivation? All right, Michael Apted, what's my motivation? What's my motivation, Michael Apted? What is the conflict at the core of Fossey? And I'm obviously being facetious with the last one, but the point is I've got absolutely no emotional connection to Weaver's character in this film whatsoever. Yeah. And then there's a point in the last half hour where, as you say, Scott, she suddenly starts coming over all Lord of the Flies, and it's clearly intended to be a dramatic pivot point, and maybe the dramatic pivot point of the entire movie. And it falls flat in its face because, frankly, I just don't care about her. And I haven't liked her since earlier in the film when she's threatened to kill a clearly terrified child who was roped into hunting gorillas by adults with machetes. So I would want to state very clearly that I don't condone what happened to Diane Fossey, but if this film is in any way reflective of her methods in, quote, conservation, then I'm guessing we would probably all agree that she very much made her own bed in that respect.
Yes, I had a very similar feeling. I did have a strong emotional connection with Diane Fossey, Craig, but it was strong antipathy because I did not like her at all. she's a moron, which is never going to please me at all. Apparently, the important thing she took away from Louis Leakey's talk at the start was appendix, which was so important she had to write appendix down inside a book. The only note she took to it, which I assume
Did she write a question mark
pain.
next to it?
well, she follows up when she meets Leakey again in Rwanda. Or no, where does it begin? Zaire, isn't it? No, where is
I
it?
believe it's the Congo. Where
It begins in the Congo, and then she has to cross
to
the border to
Rwanda,
Rwanda, doesn't she?
But Congo is Zaire because it's not Democratic Republic of Congo. I've forgotten. Anyway,
all
she
right,
turns up there, she
mastermind.
says, I've left all of my things behind. I've left my my boyfriend and my appendix. So I'm assuming because she'd seen that somebody had an emergency appendectomy. Had the appendicitis when they were there before. She had her appendix removed electively, and I assume that that's meant to tie back to the beginning of the film. But
we'll never know.
I'm thinking that if you're preparing to do that and you're prepared to get surgery to take your appendix, like, you're probably not going to write that down because you might forget it. It's like passport, keys, money, appendix. Damn, it's still inside me.
The infuriating thing about this film, though, is that it's faffs about and wastes a whole lot of time of like, oh, look at me smiling next to obviously real gorillas. This is bound to get me an Oscar or a Golden Globe at least. Look at me being all natural around these wild animals. People will appreciate the effort that's been put into this performance because I have had to sit next to gorillas and get to know gorillas and make sure that gorillas are not going to stave my head in as I give this performance. And it's all fine and well, but you have so much padding there, and you're given, her relationship with Brian Brown is given completely short shrift, sorry, and then there's the only other sort of interesting dynamic she really could potentially have is with, there are two potentially interesting dynamics that she could have that are also given absolutely short shrift, and one of them is with Sembagare. Who's her tracker, who's a really interesting guy who basically bluffs his way into the job. And you think, okay, this guy's cool. And he plays such a minor role and is of such little import to the plot that he might as well not even be there. And then the other one is the local politician. He's like the local governor or something like that, the one who she sort of starts...
the Ministry of Interior, yeah.
Yes, the guy who works for the Ministry of the Interior, and I cannot for the life of me remember his character's name. But she has...
Makara, I think. Is he Makara?
She has an interesting dynamic with him, quite a fractious one to begin with, where you get the impression that, right, okay, she's beginning to fathom out that she's going to have to think politically if she wants to get ahead. And then a big title card comes up saying 5 years later. And she, again, is having some sort of not quite so abrasive conversation with this guy, but she's clearly learned something about that. And two things there. First of all, she throws that completely out the window when she goes troppo and starts threatening people, as you say, Scott, and claiming the mountain is hers and the gorillas are hers. So what was that lesson you learned? And also, that 5 years that you've just skipped over, that's probably the most interesting part of this story.
Yes, the bit where you've successfully had no poachings within 10 months, as she tells her new students when they arrive.
Yes.
How did you get to that? Don't just gloss over that.
And now time for something interesting. Oh, wait, black screen, 5 years later. And that was the amazing thing that happened. Yeah. Anyway, look at these gorillas and how I play with them. And it's just infuriating. And it's bizarre to recount quite the fuss that there was around this film in critical circles, because it was nominated for a lot of stuff.
Yes.
And I'm sure it felt very compelling at the time, but certainly now with hindsight, it's absolute fluff as far as being any kind of study either of character or situation or the goal of conservation. It's so flyaway. It's like a fart on the wind.
I know, and again, it's they play very differently now. Not that they wouldn't necessarily get made now, but there was certainly more uproar about the fact that it focuses around this white woman in the middle of this African country.
Oh, the whole white saviour thing, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah,
and then also her choice use of language when she loses her patience with Sembagare later on.
One of the things I was about to mention, Craig, exactly.
Yeah.
So
these people who have spent the last 6 years doing nothing but carrying heavy luggage and other supplies around at her beck and call, and she decides to she throws a rattle out the pram and immediately denounces them as was it lazy wogs?
Yes.
Yes.
Hideous.
Brilliant, Diane.
I was coming on to that, right? So. Having very briefly read something about this afterwards, I hadn't seen this film before. I've always been aware of it, I think, but I'd never actually seen it. But I very briefly read something, and to be honest, I didn't care for this film at all, so I didn't do anything more than skim Wikipedia. It's all I felt it deserved. But it mentioned, I think perhaps Roger, or a reference to Roger Ebert's review, mentioned that she had some sort of mental issues, mental health issues, and like, yeah, if the film's got them in there, they're very well hidden. Sally, it's not portrayed like that, which would have been interesting, would have made her potentially more sympathetic character, Sally more interesting, because she's barely a character. And starts off as I said, like the appendix thing, probably should forget that. She gets really annoyed with Brian Brown's character when he turns up and says, I'm going to take photographs, for National Geographic, the magazine that's paying you to go and work with the gorillas. It's not like they're known for photographs or anything, And then
she obviously clearly also does not understand that profile is a part of her work.
Yes.
And if she wants to continue her work, she needs profile and she needs funding.
And that's well before she's taken possession of these and created her own little fiefdom in the mountains. But then it moves on. And when I lost all interest and sympathy for the character at all was when she started threatening that child. That poor child. Terrified child. I'm like, that's not on.
Yeah, I'm going to threaten him with a noose, and then I'm going to pretend to be a witch, which I know is something that he culturally believes in deeply.
Yeah, the poor. That well done for that kid for the acting, but that's just a horrendous scene. And then she moves on to sling those horrible words at her workers. And when somebody's really angry, like, it can go two ways. One time you can somehow pick words just that you intend to hurt someone, or your anger, it betrays how you really feel. That is very clearly the second there.
Yeah,
right?
It's the mask coming off.
Yeah, because she follows that up after Sembagare says to her, please don't speak to them like that. They work for you and they've worked for you for a long time. She says, I pay their wages, I can do what I want, basically. And like, whoa. Yeah, well, that's not a problematic attitude at all. And then
sorry, on you go.
No, you finish.
No, I was going to say, and fortunately, the one thing I appreciated about that conversation was his response to her, which is that, of course, I believe in what you're doing, but today I'm disappointed in you.
Yeah.
Or the words to that effect.
But she says that, right? And then like, okay, so you've clearly betrayed exactly how you feel about these people, but if maybe you see that you've done something wrong, you can try to make yourself better, because otherwise what's the point of like trying to educate people about that if they don't think they can change?
Yeah.
But if the scene ends with her realising what she's said and done and apologise, but no, that scene ends with her being upset and Sembagare comforting her. So the scene, in fact, is all about her. It's like, no. And then what happens with those guys from that tribe? They've hacked off bits of that ape, and I mean, it's horrific, and I can see why she's upset, and it's a horrible thing. But beyond the bit I mentioned earlier about what Brian Brown has said earlier when he's talking about his hypothetical Miami doctor, there is absolutely no acknowledgement in the film at all of the economics and the fact that these are not wealthy people. Right,
it's hinted at, but it's not explored.
Yeah, because you can see the fact that those people have threadbare clothes that have been patched many times, full of clothes, and at least 2 of the 3 or 4 times you see them, they're wearing the same clothes, suggesting to me that they don't have any other clothes. Right?
Yeah.
These are not wealthy people, and you say, well, that's horrible to eat gorillas and they're endangered, but the sort of the poacher side of it and the trophies for Westerners is a separate part. But the fact that people there might eat it, they can't just pop down to Sainsbury's.
No.
Like, these people don't have money, then this is how they feed themselves and their families. But there was absolutely no acknowledgement in the film at all.
Well, no, there
horrendous.
is. It's mentioned as a topic of conversation, I think, at least twice. But again, it's like a fart in the wind. It's nothing ever comes of those occasions where it is brought up that there are economic considerations here. It's like, okay, cool story, right? I'm going to go back to patronising these natives who clearly need my help to sort out this mess they've got themselves into.
Yeah.
And do you know the other thing I fear about this film, guys, is that, see, when you're talking about the tribe and the kid being terrified and how convincing it was, I'm not entirely convinced that this film, being made by white filmmakers in the mid-80s, didn't just essentially rope in these local people and do nothing to help them, and probably nothing to benefit the local economy. They probably swooped in and thought, brilliant, cheap labour. And Michael Apted's probably just gone, look at that boy over there. He looks suitably terrified. He's got no idea what's going on. Sigourney, drag him over here and threaten him with death. He's probably genuinely frightened.
The thought did actually cross my mind, and while I was watching and when I was saying about it, Craig, was that actually, I have this feeling that there's maybe some truth into that.
Yeah, I doubt it's as extreme as the example I've given, but I can't imagine that there hasn't been some vague amount of exploitation going on.
Oh yeah, of that kid, like maybe not telling them what was going to happen, and then putting that mask on it. It's a creepy mask.
Certainly is.
And yeah, there's also the issues I always have problems with. Like, to be fair, it's not as bad as some other films I've seen in various similar regions, but they're suggesting their belief in witchcraft is really kind of primitive and stupid. Like, it's not any different to believing in any sort of god or anything. There's no difference.
No,
it's just
exactly.
a different belief. It's not any less stupid. It's still stupid, but suggesting somehow that it's worse because it's witchcraft and not, Catholic Church or something.
It's not the right kind of superstition. Yes.
Yeah, it's not organised superstition that threatens people with eternal torment.
Yes.
Yeah.
So she's a spectacularly unsympathetic character. And then, again, I don't condone murder. I don't think that she should have been murdered. But if the film seems to be suggesting it's the leader of that group, and if somebody had this psychological torture of hanging someone up and making them think that you're going to hang them with a noose
kicking the chair out from under them. Yeah.
I'd probably want some revenge. And
didn't she go and burn their village down?
Yeah, she also burned their houses. So as well as that actual one incident of the psychological torment, she then burned her house. She's kind of got it coming. She's not getting any sympathy from me in this film.
Let's be honest, it's very much a declaration of war.
Yes. And also, you've got to remember too that the film, again, the tiniest whiff of it at one point, or a couple of points down, but not only is she doing this, she's this white Westerner coming to a country that's been messed up for 200 years by white Westerners. It's like, you're not very clever for someone who's claiming to be some great authority in anything. You seem to be completely oblivious to anything else.
Yeah. What this situation needs is more interfering white people.
Yeah, she seems to have no cultural sensitivity at all.
But listen, we're getting super SJW over here. We're probably turning people off. It's great. Yeah. Down with the monkeys. They had it coming. And so did that kid, frankly. Scott, did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
It's still better than Congo.
I don't know. Kind of technically, yes, but I enjoyed the Congo more, but that's more because I just hated it in a conventional way, and that's opposed to hating the main character.
Hating it for proper reasons, yeah.
I knew you were kind of on my side, Drew.
I'm watching Congo, and instead I'm more focused on hating the things that are wrong with it, which is, to be clear, is everything, rather than because I hated the central character so much.
Everything and also nothing. But listen, I'll point out how wrong you are in a minute. It's a beautiful segue anyway, Drew. Thank you for setting that up so nicely.